So this is Tea with LSAT Steve. I believe this is number 9. And tonight we're once again trying something new, doing something a little bit different, law school personal statements. A lot of folks don't know, but inside my LSAT courses over at LSAT Unplugged, I actually cover law school admissions as well. I cover the personal statement, the diversity statement, character and fitness, optional essays and addenda, letters of rec. Why? Because people were asking for it. Obviously, if you're taking the LSAT, you're probably applying to law school, in which case you've got to handle all the application stuff too. And so since folks were asking for it, I'm doing it. I've put a couple of links in the chat to previous public law school personal statement workshops I've done over the past month or two. So if you're looking to get a taste of what my general thoughts are on law school personal statements, check out those links. One of those includes a general Q&A I did as well. And so I'm not doing Q&A tonight. I'm not covering the basics of what a law school personal statement is and what it isn't, because I've done it already. And doing the same thing over and over gets old, especially when you can record things pretty easily. So check out those links for the basics. What we're going to do here is a little bit different. We're going to spend a bit of time doing some deep dives with particular individuals' personal statement situations. I'll do a little bit of hot seat coaching, and then I'm going to workshop some actual law school personal statement drafts that were submitted to me over the Facebook group and Instagram. So the LSAT Unplugged Facebook group, the LSAT Unplugged Instagram. If you're not already members of those or following me there, please do. That's where I found these personal statement drafts. And so those folks get their statements workshopped by me tonight, where we've got 5 on the agenda. Before that, we will do some hot seat coaching. And before that, I want to just invite you to take a moment to think about your personal statement topic. If you're here, you're probably not done with it yet. You probably came here looking for answers, looking for guidance, either to get hot seat coaching yourself or to learn from the experiences of others. And so I want you to invite you to imagine for a moment that whatever your resume, whatever your background, whatever your personal situation is, it's enough. You don't have to have started an NGO to save the world. You don't have to have been involved in a lawsuit or had some personal exposure to the law. Obviously, if you have, that's fantastic. But even if you haven't, that's okay too. Whatever you've got in your background alone at this point in time is enough. You can write about literally anything in your personal statement. The question is how you go about it, how you frame it. And so that's the place I want to play from today. I also want you to imagine that if you're staring at a blank screen with a cursor blinking in a Word document or a Google Doc, get something down. Even a bad personal statement draft is better than nothing at all, because that gives us something to work with. So if you're at the blank screen stage of your personal statement, take some time after this call, tonight, tomorrow, whatever, take 20 minutes, just free write, and then we can move forward from there. But get something down. Even 100 words, 200, 300 is enough as a starting point. You can always expand from there, but it's hard to go from 0 to 1. So tonight, I want you to go from 0 to 1 in some way. Think of one story from your background, one thing you'd want to share with the world, or at least share with the law school admission officer. Get that down on paper, get that down on the screen, and then we'll move forward from there. Now, I've got some folks on the agenda who share their stories and share their struggles over email, so I want to bring some of them in.
Hi, so I graduated with a bachelor in elementary and special ed, and I'm trying to become an advocate in the special education field, and I think getting my JD is going to help me achieve this goal. I started writing my personal statement. I struggled a little bit to think of a topic, but then I remembered an intervention I made working in a special ed classroom with a child with a learning disability. So I just kind of been struggling to make it sound like I'm going to a law school and not a master's in education right now.
Sure. Well, it's great that you have that real world experience. You talked about the IEPs over email. That's individual educational program?
Yeah.
Right? Okay. Yeah. So I got the sense from your email that you were looking to advocate for these students to perhaps get them the proper help, the proper support. Is that correct?
Correct.
So what were some of the struggles you faced in navigating, I imagine, some bureaucracies and achieving that goal?
Well, the biggest struggle in making that plan was definitely the research, making sure it was appropriate, because I didn't feel very secure in myself, even though I had 3 years of courses in elementary and special education. I didn't feel like I was ready to make that intervention plan for this student because this was a real student with a real disability, and that was kind of a struggle I felt going through with that. Also, I could see that some of the teachers weren't so open to the intervention, some who weren't with a background in special education. So that was another challenge that I had while doing that.
Cool. So that all sounds fantastic to me.
Okay.
You've served as an advocate. You've navigated some bureaucracy. You've had to fight for this particular student. You're representing them in a sense. And there were some folks who were not necessarily on board with that.
Okay.
So I see a lot of drama, a lot of struggle here. Did you ultimately persevere in this?
Yeah, I did.
That's even better. And if you hadn't, that would have been fine too. It's not necessarily about the end point. It's about what you learned along the way. But this obviously doesn't hurt. So this all sounds fantastic to me. Now, I guess the question you were asking me before was, how does this differ from simply pursuing a master's?
Right.
How does it differ? What would a master's involve? What does the law involve?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I just feel like every time I write it, I end up sounding like I'm applying for a master's program, which in some cases I am. There are dual programs with a JD and a master's in education, but for some schools where it's just solely JD, I'm having a hard time making it sound like this JD is going to help me achieve my end goal here of being an advocate, because there are special education lawyers that do come into schools. So that is something that I'm interested in pursuing one day.
So what exactly does a special education lawyer do?
They come in and they make sure that the special educator is following the IEP, the general educators are giving the appropriate accommodations to that student, and just following the IEP to what it's written for that student. Okay,
so they're serving as a check. They're doing some oversight in a sense. They're giving some accountability there.
Right.
And they're advocating on behalf of this particular student.
Right. If the parent feels that the IEP isn't what their student needs or their child needs, and the school's kind of disagreeing with the parent, the advocate can come in and step in for the parent as well. Cool.
So it sounds like you've gotten a real taste of what that's like based on your experience.
Right.
So I would just say, highlight that.
Okay.
Now, to address your concern more directly though, what would a master's program involve? After getting the master's degree, what would you be doing instead rather than being an advocate, presumably?
If I was to
just simply pursue a master's and not pursue a JD.
If I was to pursue a master's, what would I be doing instead? I would probably go back to teaching.
Sure.
But yeah, if it was just solely a master's degree, it would just be for teaching.
Right. And so that would just simply equip you to
be a
special ed teacher, be a teacher in general, perhaps at a slightly higher pay grade, perhaps. Plenty of teachers have master's degrees. That's fantastic. But they're doing something different in particular, because as an attorney, you would be serving as an advocate. You'd be coming in from the outside.
Correct.
And you'd be advocating on behalf of one particular student at a time, perhaps.
Right. Yep.
So just emphasize that.
Okay. That's a good point.
But I think your story already highlights the advocate in you, and it highlights the kind of work that you'd be looking to do already. So you've already gotten a taste of that. Okay. So just call that out.
That's perfect.
Anything else going on for you?
I think that was my biggest challenge, honestly, just feeling that topic, that story was good enough for a personal statement, and just trying to focus it more toward the JD, which I feel like I can better do now. So thank you.
Fantastic. Do you have a draft yet?
I'm working on a draft, yeah. It's kind of feeling like a story, which I don't know if that's exactly the way I should go about it, but it's a work in progress.
Well, a story's fine. A story is certainly more compelling than not a story. So okay. I would say you're probably on the right track. Just go deep on this particular story, this particular anecdote, okay, and call out and emphasize the role that you played as an advocate.
Okay. Perfect.
Fantastic. Well, thank you. Trella, you emailed me as well. You had some challenges you were struggling with. You want to share more?
Hi. So I think my biggest struggle is like trying to stick out, because I don't feel like I've done like this crazy thing or lived this crazy life or experienced like a crazy trauma. So I think like, I feel like my personal statement's just going to be like boring.
I hear you. Well, it's possible you have experienced one of those things, even if you don't necessarily realize it. I certainly wouldn't want you to go out and try to experience a trauma in order to get better writing material. But whatever you have at this point, like I said, it may be enough. So why do you want to go to law school? Let's start there.
Well, I've always been interested in family law, and then I just moved from Hawaii, and when we were in Hawaii, I worked at a family law firm, and I just got like, I really liked what they were doing, and mostly with the kids in foster care and like the adoption hearings.
Okay, so how do you get into family law in the first place? I know it's a job, but was there a particular thing that drew you to that profession?
I think it was just the children mostly. So I just like went into a law firm and offered like intern work, anything they needed. A lot of it was like filing for a while, and then after like a month or two, they hired me.
What's the most interesting thing about your job, or the most compelling thing about your job? You said foster children, right?
Yeah, I think it was like the cases where like we had like two parents die, and then the little boy was stuck like without a family. And I think that's what really like kind of sparked my interest to go further than like paralegal work.
Did you get to work on that case quite a bit?
Yeah,
Were
and
you
I got to
exposed
like
it?
attend the hearing.
What was your biggest takeaway from that?
Just like I think like the compassion put into it. So like you could tell the attorneys that I was working with really cared for this little boy and did what was best in his interest.
Were you exposed to this case? I know that the attorneys were working on it. What was your level of involvement?
I did like legal assistant paperwork stuff, and then me and another paralegal were allowed to attend the hearing, and then I like sat with the little boy while like the adults were talking and stuff. I offered to just hang out with the little boy, and we just like played cards.
That's cool. What was the outcome or for that particular boy?
His uncle got like he became guardian.
How did you feel about the outcome?
It was good. Everyone was like crying and happy.
Fantastic. Well, that right there is powerful. And that right there could be your personal statement. If you focus on your takeaways and how you were impacted by working on that case. Obviously, you weren't one of the attorneys on it, but that's why you're going to law school. You don't have to be.
Yeah.
But you got exposure to the real world practice of law. I can even tell from the way that you speak about this that you were impacted by it. And you now want to pursue family law. Your journey started, at least in the short term, as you shared with me, offering to intern, turned into a job. That alone says something about what your internship performance was like, that they took you on. And then you got connected with this story. And now you want to pursue family law.
Okay, cool.
There's a very clear progression here. And this is actually fantastic. I said at the beginning that you don't need to have done anything super impressive. You don't need to have started an NGO to save the world. You don't need to have had exposure to the law. But the fact that you did, let's talk about that. If you have it, why not talk about it? They like to see it if you have it. But if not, you could have figured something else out too.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Just get down a couple hundred words, start there, expand from there.
Okay.
Fantastic. Thank you, Christina. Thank you, Charlie. Let's see who else. Let's see him. Ayaka or Christopher, would one of you like to share something that you're facing, something you're dealing with, something that you'd like support on?
Sure. So part of my experience is in cybersecurity, but I don't want to have my essay end up being me being solely interested in pursuing like cybersecurity law. I am interested, but I don't want to pigeonhole myself in that essay. I'm wondering if you have any tips on kind of getting out of that.
Tell me more about your concern about pigeonholing yourself.
So my career has been like in I've done translation in the tech space, and then the most recent 3 years has been in cybersecurity, where it was a lot of translating for consulting work, which kind of leaned into the legal side of things in a foreign country. So I feel like my essay goes into a lot of that, being in a foreign country, explaining American laws, and then like this nuance of no actual laws that are really dictating cybersecurity at the moment. So kind of being in that space of exploration and kind of how governments are trying to figure out how to navigate the cybersecurity space. And so I feel like I'm going way, way far into the details of that rather than explaining sort of my interest in why I want to go to law school. And so I'm kind of getting sidetracked a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not feeling the personal in this. I'm feeling what governments are up to and all the details and the technical aspects and the laws themselves. I mean, obviously you might need to give a little bit of a framework about that, since if it's a topic that not a lot of folks are familiar with, but I'm not hearing about you here. So I hear that you're interested in this.
Yes.
But that alone isn't enough. I want to hear more about what you've done. Make it more personal.
Mm-hmm.
So is there something in your work experience or something in your personal experience we could talk about? Is there a story here?
Yeah, I think for my essay, I'm really focusing on, I've been in this bicultural situation for my whole life. You know, I'm bilingual in Japanese and English, and my career's been in that space. I've been in a legal department so the statement really takes me through kind of my career of being in a legal department in a very domestic Japanese company, trying to expand into the US. And then also being in a company that is purely American in a Japanese space, working with the government and all that. So being very close to the legal conversation. And so I want to know more. I want to be able to speak with authority in that space is my reasoning for wanting to go into law. And so that's kind of the structure of what I'm sort of writing right now.
Fantastic. Well, that's where I would focus. I would focus on who you are and what you've done in that professional capacity. Mm-hmm. Focus more on what you've done than on what you will do, because what you've done, that's guaranteed. We have the evidence for that. What you will do, you could go in a million different directions, like you said. And so you don't need to say, this is exactly what I'm going to do with my career. Here's the 5-year plan, the 10-year plan, the 20-year plan. Things could change. As a 0L, as a pre-law, you haven't been to law school yet. You don't necessarily even know what new paths may open up to you during those 3 years of law school, what new areas you may discover. And it's all theoretical. It's all claims, right? So you want to focus probably 80, 90% on what you've done up to this point.
Right.
And that's enough. You don't have to have done anything legal at all, period. If you have, that's fantastic. Even just the cross-cultural international work, that alone's pretty cool. So definitely call that out, celebrate that, show how you can work in both contexts. If you can, that's amazing. And then share a little bit about, because I've done these things, this is what I might want to do going forward. But that could just be a couple sentences at most.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course, Ayaka. Thank you. All right, folks. Well, we've got a lot of other things on the agenda for tonight. We actually have 5 personal statements that we're going to workshop. And so we will undoubtedly go beyond an hour. If you have to leave after an hour, totally fine. No worries. I put a link to the personal statement drafts in the Google Drive document. So feel free to open that up. But I will also, of course, do a screen share so we can take a look at that together. So here we have personal statement number 1. I'm going to read it out. It may take a couple minutes. Feel free to read on your end as well. And then we will talk through it together, share some thoughts. I'll be looking for all of you to share some feedback and your ideas on it, not just me sharing my thoughts. I have not read these thoroughly. I've given them a quick skim, but I have not actually looked at them in depth at all yet. So this will be new to me also. So here's the first one. I'm on deck, next up to bat. I am practicing my swing, preparing to walk to home plate. The bases are loaded, the pressure is on. I am laser focused on the task at hand. We have 2 outs in the bottom of the 9th. My thoughts are suddenly interrupted by a comment from the other team, a racial slur directed at my teammate. I can tell it affected her. Now my job is crystal clear. Not only do I have to perform for myself, I have to perform for my team and specifically for my teammate in retaliation to that comment from the outfield. The game eventually finished with a score of 7-6. Our team won. It did not feel like a win for me. Rather, the only thing on my mind was my teammates' well-being. As a coach, my father taught me anything worth having requires hard work, commitment, and perseverance. I was taught that people cannot and should not be judged based on the color of their skin, rather who they are as an individual. As a young girl growing up in a predominantly white suburb, race was simply a verb meaning a running punishment to the outfield with the loser having to collect the bases. Race had a completely different meaning to me, most likely because it was never something I had judged against me. Sports should always be a space of inclusion, a safe space where athletes are connected and have an obligation to one another. Oftentimes, team is family and we rely on each other. Although this may not be the case for all athletes, my obligation on that bantam softball game day was to my teammate, and now it has broadened to all marginalized athletes in sports. Despite confusion, sadness, and anger at that time, I am no longer scared or intimidated by these racist comments. I am motivated to use my voice and I want to be empowered by my knowledge. As a lawyer, I believe I can make a difference and will make changes to the institutionalized and systemic racism that is, after decades, still deeply embedded in professional and collegiate sports. I do not take my privileges lightly. I believe it needs to be utilized to the best of my ability to mobilize change for people who have less of a voice in society. I faced my own challenges and adversity growing up, but the difference is the hurdles that I faced were not a result of the color of my skin. White privilege exists as a direct result of both historic and present racism, biases, and practices designed to oppress people of color. I'm not here to simply advocate for those who don't have a voice, but to help ensure that those who are oppressed get their voice and advocacy that they deserve. There are added barriers to success in the sports industry for people of color. I commit to listening and amplifying the voices of these marginalized groups. I believe that law school in the UK would be ideal for me for several reasons. These prestigious schools are internationally recognized, diverse, and multicultural, and I will gain experience with a law firm while completing my degree. As a sports lawyer, I believe that I can change people's perspectives. I can better serve the industry and help those in need. Through a combination of academic, athletic, and life experience, coupled with my vocational background, I know that I can be a catalyst for change. Just like any other space in society, the sports industry should be a place of diversity, a place where skin color should not facilitate positions of leadership. I know that an overwhelming amount of challenges face me as a woman, both in the sports industry and law school. Sport has given me many advantages. It created a safe space for me to be myself, achieve my goals, de-stress, be part of a larger purpose, and have fun, while also being one of my biggest passions. It confirmed for me that in order to achieve something, one must be passionate. Reflecting on my educational experiences as an accounting major, the interest was there. However, the passion is what lacked. The completion of my undergraduate degree allowed me to explore different options academically and extracurricularly, realize my true passion, spurred my drive, courage, and self-esteem. Sport taught me the importance of having the right attitude, goal setting, preparation, fair play, perseverance, and endurance, qualities all of which I believe will directly translate to my success in law school and as a lawyer. Okay, so would love to get all of your thoughts on this one. Please keep criticism constructive, not simply critical. Honor the individual's story and experience, and let's encourage them to create the space where they can bring out the best that they have to share. And as you're sharing with others, also realize that we often teach what we most need to learn. So whatever you're recognizing in someone else's statement may actually apply to your own draft, even if you don't have one yet. So who has some feedback for this individual on their statement?
I have some feedback.
Sure.
I feel like there's like somewhat of like an outsideness. I don't know how to describe it. I feel like they don't actually understand. They're providing a bunch of like adjectives and nouns, but I feel like I need to see like what examples are there to back that up. She says that her teammate felt bad, and she describes it through her point of view through sports. But I there's like a lack of passion and actual like insight. She's listing, it's like using like skin color, but I want to know what she actually did to help this person. She said that how they felt was bad, but what passion was there to actually stop it? She continued to play the game, and there was no voice. So then that person is kind of just like a sideline character almost in her main pursuit of whatever that is.
That's excellent feedback. Yes, there's not a whole lot of action here on the part of the author of this statement. It's more they're a witness. They're noticing, and this individual says in line 4, I can tell it affected her. Now my job is crystal clear. I'm gonna play better. That's really the only concrete action we have as a result here, and it's largely focused on the teammate, not on the author here. So we're seeing this author looking from the outside. But yeah, I think this statement isn't as strong as it could be, in part because the author of the statement is not the hero of the story. So thank you for that feedback, Victoria. I think that's spot on. Other thoughts or reflections on this one?
I'll say something.
Sure.
I think it's kind of interesting to adding on to that one that the first 2 paragraphs, it focuses on somebody else, and then it focuses on the parents and the teachings that you were brought into. Having been in just high school sports, like there are lots of instances where there's something that goes wrong and like you kind of feel like you need to step in and talk up for somebody. So I feel like there's almost kind of that lack there where it's like you almost feel like there should be more experiences that she can pull from and say like as a whole there's kind of this discrepancy in athletics, because this seems kind of, I don't know how old she was at this point, it doesn't really matter, but kind of knowing like seeing it systematically just from this one situation to kind of pull from. That makes sense. I like the structure though. Like if there was like kind of a more inclusive example at the beginning and kind of going down and being like, now I've gotten to sports, I feel like that would be helpful.
Yeah, I agree. I think the structure here is great. It starts off in the moment. There's an anecdote. We have a story there. Then the author is zooming out and giving some reflections on it. But I think I think this person probably has an even better story they could share. One where they are the hero of the story, one where they're the one taking actions. Or if not, that's fine too. But I'd love to see this author coming more from a place of power. I feel like this person almost felt defeated in a way by what they witnessed, what they experienced, what they saw someone else experience. And then they're talking a lot about race and white privilege and saying, I've encountered my own obstacles, but what are they? I think, let me see if I can find those exact lines. Not seeing it at the moment. But I'm wondering what are those particular struggles this person has. Oh yeah, here we go. I faced my own challenges and adversity growing up. Okay, well, what is that? Share that, because that's undoubtedly transformative for you in some way. So I want to see, okay, well, what were you transformed by? I'm sure that the person who experienced this racial slur, perhaps one of several, that person was impacted by that far more deeply than this author was. So I want to hear what this author has been impacted by in their own life. Or if they were so powerfully impacted by what others experienced and how they witnessed that, what did they concretely do? I see a lot of vague general statements here in this essay, in particular, this paragraph. I'm not here to simply advocate for those who don't have a voice, blah, blah, blah. Those are promises about the future, but what have you done? That's what I want to hear about. I want to hear about what you've done. I want to hear about a story in your life where you did something, not just what somebody else experienced. Then there's a lot of space here devoted to the future going forward. And I talked about the future should be a small percentage of the statement. The present and the past should be far more. I'm not really sure even why this person chose to focus on race in particular. I feel like this one anecdote, I feel like if maybe this was a prompt for the essay, maybe things are different in the UK law school admissions program to which this person was applying. I can't speak to that particular context here, but it's not clear to me that this is the best topic for this person in particular. Too much of it is vague, too much of it is general, too much of it's focused on the future. That's my general take on it. I don't know this individual. I don't know the resume, but I imagine there's probably other things that could be talking about as well or in addition. Oh, I had a great question in the chat here from Billy. What if you love to write and you make your stories come to life in persuasion? Yeah, I mean, that's fantastic. If you love to write, you're undoubtedly going to write a better personal statement draft, no question about it. And you can make a lot of different things come to life. I could imagine even using this topic and improving it significantly. So any topic, like I said, could be fine. The question's how you go about it. But I want to see more personal impact on the author themselves and more concrete stories and details from the author themselves here. That to me would be a lot more persuasive. So part of being persuasive to me is having compelling evidence, compelling stories, rather than generalities. And he says, Lydia pointed out, it doesn't need to explicitly state your reasons for going to law school. You can show that rather than stating it directly. That's always the case, always the case. And yes, the recording of this will be on the LSAT Unplugged YouTube channel sometime within the next couple of days or next week at most. One more question in the chat here, then we'll move on to the next statement unless there's any other general feedback on this one. What if you've experienced trauma and were denied any degree of justice, but at the same time, you don't want that to define you? Yeah, we'll talk about it, but tell it as a story of struggle and ultimately triumphing over what you experienced. Even if you did not triumph in the moment, given the trauma that you experienced, how have you grown through it? How have you been shaped by it? And what are you going to do going forward as a result? What were your big takeaways from that experience? That's really where I would want you to focus.
I have a quick question.
Yeah, sure, Michelle.
What do you think about the spacing on this one?
You mean the line spacing?
Yeah, shouldn't it be double spaced? Does it matter?
It would depend on the instructions for the particular school. Double spaced is typically the default. I just happen to, a lot of these were actually submitted to me double spaced, but I just kept it on one page just to be, because that suited me better for my purposes. That's all really.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Hey, Steve, are we going to move on or could I add some comments?
If you got something else on this one, please go ahead.
Sure. So I don't want to beat a dead horse. I think the feedback that's already been stated has been good. I would add that some of in addition to what was said about having clear, concrete examples to back up what you say you value, some of the details just on first listening to you read it out seemed a bit inconsistent. So they mentioned wanting to go to top UK law schools because they're diverse. I don't know if that's true. Maybe they are diverse, but a lot of top schools tend not to be that diverse. So that just seems like a question mark. And then also stay away from the usage of cliches. The idea of giving a voice to marginalized communities it's just so overused. And I think that a lot of conversations that are being had around racial justice have moved beyond that. So assuming this person wants to stick on this topic, I think just having a more nuanced and fleshed out perspective would be useful.
No, that's fantastic feedback, Richard. That occurred to me as well. It seemed a little bit general. That's why I was kind of thinking, was this person assigned this topic or did they just feel that they needed to write about race in particular? Because it felt like they don't have enough exposure to the topic or haven't really thought it through enough to have something unique and original to say. So I feel like they would want to go through more drafts to get to to discover and develop their own unique ideas around it or their own unique take on things. So I agree with you 100%. And we want to avoid all the cliches, certainly. And that's why I think getting feedback from others can be useful to call them out. Yeah, fantastic feedback. Thank you. All right, well, let's move on to the next one. It's on the third page here. On March 16th, 2016, what I thought would be another ordinary day in the life of a Division I student athlete took a turn for the worst. I remember everything vividly, from the smell of the grass to the humidity in the air. I began to stretch, taking in all the moments, squinting from the sun's brightness. I began a search through the crowd for my mother. There she was, mid-crowd, wearing a white and green shirt with my number on it. I smiled and waved, heading to the huddle, beginning to take the field. The scrimmage structure was grueling and intense, but I performed well. After the scrimmage, I took pictures with fans and talked to the locals who seemed overly ecstatic about what they had seen. This had become the routine, but in the middle of a conversation, a trainer notified me that the head coach wanted to see me in his office. I jogged up the ramp, taking off my shoulder pads as thoughts raced through my head. Since the end of the season, 3 other players and I had been competing for a scholarship. We were all sacrificing time on the weekends, staying up late to study, doing extra workouts, and spending a few nights crying. Was it all finally paying off? I walked into the coach's office, overcome with excitement at the prospect of finally being able to relieve my mother of the financial burden of supporting a student athlete. I sat next to my mother with my brother on my lap. I smiled, looking up towards my coach as he announced that I would be receiving a scholarship. But after he finished speaking, the emotions around me didn't seem to be as joyful. Overwhelmed with emotion, I glanced over towards my mother and noticed she was crying. My demeanor abruptly changed as my mother looked over and rubbed my hand, tears streaming down her face. She informed me that on her recent checkup, she had been diagnosed with metastatic stage 4 breast cancer. I sunk into my seat, devastated. I grew up in a single-parent home, with my mother playing the role of both mother and father. She had embraced our situation and led our family with grace, dignity, and a strong character. Through my mother's actions and example, she instilled in me the values to become a well-rounded young man. And now, the happiest moment of my life was overshadowed by the terrifying revelation that my mother didn't know if she would make it to the next year. Coaches came in, offering comfort and words of encouragement, but all it was to me was white noise. It felt like everything had come crashing down, but all I could do was remain silent. My life had changed. I had to balance being a caretaker and an athlete. My nights became restless. Monday through Thursday were spent at school juggling classes, homework, practice, and workouts. After workouts on Friday, I would drive 2 hours from Tampa to Orlando to accompany my mother to her chemotherapy sessions. The house would have to be cleaned, floors mopped, rugs taken out, counters bleached down, and bed linens changed. I placed trash cans around the house in case my mother became nauseated and couldn't make it to the bathroom. She lost more and more hair after every treatment. My anxiety about being underprepared for a game was now replaced with doctor's office anxiety. Excessive worrying under fluorescent lights accompanied nail biting. My mother, however, exuded the same strength she had always had as a football mom. Even though I could see the pain and uncertainty in her eyes, she would offer the same comfort after a loss. A situation like this quickly put life in proper perspective. Finding the courage to overcome adversity can be challenging, but having it made that transition possible. I'm equipped to help others do the same. I want to be a lawyer mostly because it would give me the ability to help people who are less fortunate than me. My mother didn't have anyone capable of giving her legal advice or helping her, and she eventually began to drown financially. Everything that my mother went through, at the time she needed help reviewing bills, there was no one there. So if I could help one family, it will be worth it. Whether it is looking over documents, files, and receipts in connection to the suit, I would be there. A lot of cancer patients accumulate a large amount of debt, which leaves them concerned with how they will survive or who will take care of their children. I want to be there for people who have no hope and feel like they can't make it to tomorrow, those whose quality of life has been threatened. I want to be able to give someone's mother or father peace of mind. It is of greatest importance that I find a university that supports my commitment to public service. One thing about my mother is that she is a fighter, and for the past 4 years, she has fought through everything. That inspiration, level of determination that has been instilled in me is something that I pride myself on when I was an athlete, and I will do the same as a law student. Through all of my experiences, I learned the importance of time, which is our most precious resource. So it's in our best interest to make the most of every opportunity. Yeah, Billy, sure, go ahead.
Okay, well, I wanted to say, I guess with this one, it seems like he went mainly on about his mom and not more personally about himself. I guess he could have kept the mom a little bit shorter and talk more about how he persevered throughout the struggle of taking care of his mom financially, and I guess not focus more on her illness throughout the essay.
Agreed. Yeah, lots of focus on the mom. The other thing was the sports. I wasn't really sure how the sports directly tied in to advocating for folks who may not have the resources. Seemed like the sports, to me at least, maybe I'm missing something, but I saw like the sports was basically where the author learned about the mother's cancer. But other than that, I'm not really sure how sports directly tied in. Like we could have skipped all that and left the sports out entirely.
For me, it seems like the beginning of anything, of the personal statement, story, etc., has to have like a hook, something to grab the reader's attention. When I read through this, it just seems like a play-by-play from like his day. It seems like more of like a story of each thing he did consecutively than with why he wants to go into law school. And then he goes on to his mother. It seems like he's writing, it's more about writing his mother a recommendation letter because she's the fighter, but what did he do? And I feel like he is sort of kind of deflecting off from anything that he may be experiencing, that his emotion through this, and talking about his mother's burdens. But I feel like he could have done a lot better. And from him being in that situation, he would have felt a lot of pain and anguish through that. He could have talked about that being he started a little bit good when he said that he grew up financially strained in a single parent household. But then he goes off to something else where he doesn't actually express how he wanted to advocate for people that are in less advantaged spaces.
Agreed. Yeah. So you can write a personal statement about how somebody else impacted you. It's not easy, but you can do it. Again, you can write about anything in your personal statement. The question is how. It's generally easier to write about yourself as the focus for a personal statement. But if you want to write about somebody else, like you were a paralegal and a particular client their story was impactful on you, like we discussed earlier in the family law example with foster care, that could work. Writing about the mother's breast cancer could also work, but it's how it impacted you. So you could use them as a hook, as a jumping off point, but then focus on how you were impacted and what you want to do going forward as a result of how you were impacted. But here, as Victoria said, it seems like the initial paragraph, the sports, is just part of the play-by-play. It is gripping because Division I athlete, we're on the field, there's a scrimmage, the coaches are there, other people are there, there's a lot of action happening. But does that really serve the story, or is that just, again, the chronology of what happened that day on March 16th, 2016? Does it matter that was the month, date, year? Not necessarily. So if we were to cut a lot of this, I would cut the sports part. I would reduce the words devoted to the mother's case and focus more on how the individual was impacted, even if simply internally, what were the emotions running through their head? What were the what ifs running through their head? Bring us in there. That's what I want to hear. Other thoughts on this one?
I almost kind of feel that he's going in and out of talking about like his things that he can do. Like he's obviously dedicated in being able to be disciplined and work hard because he was doing the sports thing. And it also shows like being able to juggle a lot of stuff and being dedicated to a certain cause. So I kind of wonder if it's like, I wouldn't know how to piece this together if they were going to like cut it apart and put things like you were saying how to do. I don't know. It just almost felt like he just felt uncomfortable talking about himself, like as much as he kind of needed to. And he was like pulling in other people to round it all out.
Yeah, that's hard. It's hard to write about yourself. It's something you got to get over though. And you get over it by doing it. So yeah. And if you want to talk about sports, maybe that's a separate essay, or maybe it's already covered in the resume. Obviously we know that athletics, being a student athlete, lots of positive virtues associated with that, lots of positive character traits associated. Discipline, hard work, being part of a team, waking up at 5 a.m. over the summer to train before it gets too hot. That could all be part of the mix, right? So there's lots of wonderful things about that. Doesn't all need to be in one particular essay, though. If it doesn't tie together smoothly, don't try to force it. You maybe have a diversity statement. You maybe have an optional essay or addenda you could write, or it could just be covered in the resume. That alone, it'll be there, or a rec letter. Lots of folks who are student athletes get rec letters from their coaches. Totally fine. Trust it'll be covered there. Don't feel the need to work it into every single part. Anything else on this one? All right, let's go on to the next. By the age of 5, I learned that I was undocumented. My status had been so ingrained in my childhood that it was a common topic of conversation. My father often recounted my family's long journey from El Salvador to the United States. We would be sitting at the dinner table and he would begin to explain how at age 4, I walked across the desert, how he carried my 2-year-old brother on his back throughout the grueling journey, and how he and my mother left their lives and all that they knew behind in our country. His recount was always punctuated with the promises of what I could achieve in America. Though then, I did not understand that what being undocumented meant. I was naive about how my status would ultimately impact every aspect of my life. All I knew was that I was enraged every time my parents refused to travel to SeaWorld San Diego, despite my persistence. It was later revealed that my father's reluctance to take long trips was due to his fear of being stopped by the police. My family's status also impacted their career paths and stifled their ambitions. My mother worked as a cook and my father worked in construction because they did not obtain the appropriate documentation to have higher paying jobs or pursue their own goals. However, it was not until the summer of my junior year in high school that the implications of my status affected me directly in the course of my own pursuits. I was getting ready to apply to college and felt a great sense of excitement. I was finally on the way to achieve the success that my parents assured I would receive. The feelings of eagerness and enthusiasm were soon replaced by anger and confusion when I revealed that I was undocumented to my college counselor. I learned then that I did not qualify for federal financial aid. I also realized that my hopes of attending a college outside of California were slim because many scholarship programs required U.S. citizenship. As a high-achieving student, I felt like my world had been turned upside down. I was going to be denied the opportunity for higher education simply because of my status. Anger infiltrated my body. I could not help but think that this was all unfair. That fall, my father learned about the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, Daca program. Admittedly, I did not know much about Daca, but obtaining deferred action brought a sense of assurance, excitement, and hope to my life. I felt relief because I no longer feared deportation. I felt excitement because my social security card and work permit would expand my employment opportunities and allow me to be financially stable. But most importantly, I was filled with hope, as I knew that I had the opportunity to attend the college of my choice. Receiving Daca changed my life. Through Daca, I was granted a national scholarship for Daca students. I received a full scholarship to a prestigious institution in Pennsylvania. I was able to travel to and from Los Angeles without fear, as I now possessed a California ID, and I had the opportunity to gain valuable insight and experience from my internships throughout college. Though Daca opened various opportunities that I would have otherwise not been awarded, I know that more must be done to advance the lives of millions of others like me. My undocumented experience has allowed me to empathize with those who seek a better life. I have gained insight into the issues and needs of the immigrant community, which will ultimately help me advocate for new immigration policies. Pursuing a legal career will allow me to bring professional expertise back to my community and will equip me with the skills needed to develop a framework for immigration law. Okay, thoughts on this one? Is it?
Well, I thought he spent too much time about how his mom and dad were affected by not being documented instead of, I guess, saying personally how did it affect him as a young person, like, you know, what did he miss out on, I guess, the opportunities, and then transitioning into I guess how, you know, it or the effects of I mean, I guess the effects of not being able to go to SeaWorld and not feeling, I guess, included in general society.
I hear what you mean. Yeah, it's always a concern whenever I hear that in a personal statement, we're hearing somebody else telling a story. So my father recounted this. Yeah, that's a fair point. Would that work in a diversity statement though?
I guess so, since his mom and dad are both not from here, and he can say that he's different, since his view was altered by his parents' fear, and he stands out based on his experiences, I want to say, and I guess Daca could have been included in diversity statements as well, instead of putting in his personal statement.
Yeah, I'm just planting the idea. We could come back to it, but it's a thought that I had.
Okay.
Victoria, did you have some thoughts?
For me, it almost feels like the story feels kind of shallow and cold, because he's undocumented, yes, but he didn't find out that he was undocumented until he was in high school and he was about to apply. So throughout all his life, he really didn't know the difference. He was living basically a normal life. But until he went to apply to college, that's when he found out. So a big chunk of his life was basically unaffected, and he lived a pretty clear-cut life, but and his parents sort of withheld that from him. So I feel like he has a really good story. I feel like he can talk about something like why his parents decided to travel to America in the first place, and why, and like how hard it is to immigrate into the US when you come from a very poor country, and like the idea of like American dream and how it's only held to certain people. And I feel like he can talk about and advocate towards DACA recipients and how they're treated, and making it the immigration maybe more lenient, or talk about what his criticisms are against how hard it is from people from the Latin American community and like the idea of people from Latin America to come over to the US, and like always being called like undocumented people constantly. You have papers, and like the name calling, and like this little like subtle names people call people that come from there, for example. I feel like he can go off. He maybe has a stronger story, because throughout his time, he didn't actually know he was undocumented until he was in college. So I feel like there's not enough. He doesn't. It's not as strong enough for him to write about it. Maybe that's my opinion, at least.
No, thank you, Victoria. There's two big things that you mentioned that I want to call attention to. So I thank you for bringing them up. The first is the ending is kind of vague. It's kind of weak. I think it could be a lot stronger. So when I see generalities, develop a framework for immigration law, what does that mean? What specifically do you want to do? Obviously, we know you're calling out particular things like DACA. Show that you've gotten a little bit more exposure to what are some of the particular things in immigration law that you might want to change or might want to develop further. So I'd love to hear more specifics on that. Not that you have to do a ton of legal research, but rather than being vague in general, either get specific or just don't say it at all, period. I would go one of those two directions with it. Then I think the biggest thing, and I'm glad you raised this again, Victoria, was about that moment, summer of junior year of high school. This person mentions they learned by the age of 5 that they were undocumented, but didn't really recognize the implications until much later. So what was that moment like? There's a lot of tension in that, to realize what are the actual implications of essentially being a sort of second-class citizen, not having the same rights as everybody else, even though you've been here for quite a long time. What does that look like to, in a way, have the rug pulled out from under you, to realize, oh, wait, there's all these things that I can't do that I would have thought would be totally fine. I want to really get to the moment there, because to me, there's a ton of tension, a ton of drama, and I imagine some tears maybe. That's huge. So I would want to really get to that moment in time in the story. To me, that's a lot more compelling for this individual than hearing secondhand the parents' story, the father recounting the long journey. I wouldn't start with that. I'd start with the moment in time in high school when you're realizing, oh, wait, can I even go to college? Can I even get financial aid? All my friends are going, why can't I? I thought I was like everybody else. Turns out I'm not. And then the ups and downs with then Daca and saying, okay, well, I actually can go after all. See, I was going to be denied. Anger infiltrated my body. I couldn't think this was all unfair. I want to go deeper on that. To me, that's part of the tension, part of the drama. Focus there, not on the parent's story, not even necessarily on the parents. If you want to do a separate diversity statement about your family background, that's a better place, I think, to show where you came from in terms of being an undocumented immigrant. Maybe focusing there on that and then focusing specifically on high school to college for the personal statement. And maybe there's other topics that one could talk about too. Or maybe those things could all be in this statement, but with a different framing and a different focus going into, again, keep it personal.
I personally didn't mind the referral to the parents and how he kind of started out the story. I really liked the fact that it was kind of this narrative where we get this build up and now we're somewhat invested because now we know where it comes from and the trials and tribulations. But then I feel like I agree that I feel like they shied away from divulging too much, but I think it was more for the purpose of not crying woe is me. Like I feel like they were just trying to say, well, okay, I had this hardship, but then here's how I overcame it and this is what I learned. So they weren't trying to have a sob story out of it, but it does kind of seem empty in a way because yes, we're getting all these things about Daca, but we know about Daca in general, right? Like we know kind of the big idea about it and what it's supposed to do, but how did that directly affect you? What was it like with your family? Maybe how did you go about it? Like what was the system like? Was it an easy process? Was it hard? Did it go up and down? How quickly did it become accessible to you and kind of that turnaround for your low and then your elation, right? So what did that look like? That was just my personal opinion, but I feel like they just shied away from it because they didn't want to seem like they were kind of like dragging it out.
Well, thank you, Michelle. Yeah, and that's the thing is that there's no one right answer on this. This is more of an art than a science. And so, I said one thing, you said a different thing. The author may have a third opinion. And so I would just encourage the author of this statement, play it out in different ways and see what feels right to you. See what feels right to you, but also take into mind, of course, our feedback and consider that as well. But there may be multiple ways to go about this and just figure out what feels best, but consider making some changes. And writing's never done. It's never perfect. It's just further revisions and explorations till you get closer and closer to what feels good to you. Any other feedback on this one? All right, well, let's go on to the next. Okay. Almost every morning, I would wake up at 4:45 in the morning, put my best dress pants on, my nicest button-down blouse, and my giant sweatshirt for the cold morning. I would be carrying along my heels in the blazer my mom had bought for me to make sure that I looked the part, even though she always made it clear to me that I was the part. While rushing out the door, eyes half open, my mom would drive and drop me off to catch the 5:15 train to Los Angeles Union Station. Without knowing, I would hop on the silent cart, go to the second tiered floor, and find myself in the same seat every time. Soon enough, I became what felt like a regular and would become greeted with a warm smile from the older gentleman in front of me and the woman diagonal to my seat who rarely ever stopped typing away. Her hands still moved faster than I could think that early. There were quite a few times when I found myself falling asleep on the train and once even having to be awakened by a stranger telling me that our destination had ended. Hopping out of the train, I would begin my walk. I was always a little weary since it was still dark out, but I found myself following in the direction of two other women who were going the same way. The walk uphill never got easier, especially on my shin splints. Still, even more on my heart. It should be to no surprise that I would continuously find myself walking alone in the early hours of the morning past several tens of people who found those streets to be their home. Walking on the sidewalk amongst them felt intrusive to their space, so I always felt a need to power walk even faster. Finally, a little after 6:45 a.m., I found myself walking into the largest prosecutorial office in the nation, the Los Angeles District Attorney's Office. It was immediately easy for me to have a sense of overwhelmingness and pride, knowing that I was chosen and felt lucky to be considered part of their team. It was not instantly that I felt like one of them, since there were apparent differences based on looks and my perception of their socioeconomic status. Still, with some time, I started to get comfortable and felt included. I would be invited to lunch at the trendiest sushi spots in downtown, run errands to pick up flowers for Administrative Professionals Day, and be invited to the office holiday parties. Far too often, I would find myself in settings with the district attorney's office outside of an office, and instead laughing around a table, lounging around, and feeling like one of them. However, my reality would always settle in when the day would come to an end and I was by myself taking that same walk downhill, walking past the same tents as the morning, hopping on the soonest train back to my reality, rushing to find my way to work. Every day, I found myself wanting more and more. Every morning, I felt as though it was worth the sacrifices to wake up and be part of the nation's largest prosecutorial office. Far too often, my parents expressed their support and showed how proud they were of me for making it and being a part of that community. A community filled with prosecutors and law enforcement, people who they look up to maintain justice and protect us. However, what my parents did not understand was that every day I was there, I witnessed more people like my family on the other side of a prosecutor's table than prosecuting. My parents, unbeknownst to them, do not understand the social implications of what it is to be known as the largest prosecutorial office in the nation. It comes at the high cost of marginalized groups of society that look like the community from which my parents and I belong. Being known as the largest prosecutorial office in the nation comes at the cost of so many lives and entire societies. A position of power such that the district attorney's office holds a lot of responsibility that my parents, the public, and sometimes people in the office can lose sight of understanding. Each day walking into that office, there are decisions to be made as simple as what I should get from the cafeteria to breakfast, as difficult as should negotiation deals be prepared for a defendant who is still a teenager but has had prior serious convictions. Walking to court always felt surreal until it set in that life is so fragile and every day going to court meant something much more critical than the internship I was participating in for class credit. I watched a 16-year-old testify to holding his best friend in his arms before he died. Children testified to why their dad should not be incarcerated. A mother watched her teenage son's last moments of life. And a man returned to incarceration for working double time at work instead of meeting his hours of volunteering, violating the terms of his probation. People sleep on the streets surrounding that office, and somehow, each day, they are neglected the protection of a home. Decisions were made every day that had lifelong impacts, like citing the person on the street whose resources and community have failed them. However, people ignore that there are systemic issues that do not allow for that man to volunteer, because who can choose between volunteering for free and feeding your family another day? When there's a choice to be made between the two, it can leave you on the streets near the same building that declares to protect and serve justice. Individuals are being criminalized every day for failing to surpass the odds of oppressions that have been set before them. I often think of that man who appeared in court knowing that he did not fulfill his probation requirements and how much he was set back even more for returning to incarceration. There are times when justice creates and perpetuates even more violence in marginalized communities. How is it possible that liberty can exist when people are treated to feel like intruders in their own communities and places of power? The unit in which I worked with supported and learned to understand me, but too often, that is not the case. Individuals can be discouraged and turned away from professions where there are more people against them than with them. There is a need for people who understand these systemic causes and are representational of the groups in which they are serving. Okay, thoughts?
I have a couple.
Sure, please.
So I think that right off the bat, this person would benefit from proofreading. There were a couple like turns of phrase or sentence structures that I think could be edited. So at one point they say our destination had ended. I think maybe our journey had ended or we had arrived at our destination. Later they say the community or the neighborhood to which they belong. I think that should be from which they belong. And then in the, I think the last paragraph, the question you read out that starts with how something, something. I didn't see a question mark, just stuff like that. I think they should review the structure of their sentences and make sure that they're using things properly. And then in terms of the actual content, I think that the beginning should be shortened. I think that in the beginning, they talk a lot about the culture and kind of like their first impressions of getting to the prosecutorial office. And it reads a bit like a chapter in a book where maybe the reader has more time to get into the crux of the story. But I'm thinking of an admissions counselor or a person who doesn't have that much time. And so I think you want to get to the point quicker, especially since they have some very substantive and very big ideas that they're grappling with later. So obviously they're working in a prosecutorial office and they're witnessing the responsibility of prosecutors to levy charges against people, and what are the implications, the social implications of that? How can that perpetuate unjust systems? But I think that their engagement with those ideas is fairly shallow, especially in the beginning where they're talking about like being part of the team and feeling comfortable. I'm like, that can be taken out. Like you need to get to the part about what you were witnessing. And I think that they didn't, first off, the fact that they ended with a question about, how can this work? Does this person think prosecutors can serve any kind of good function? Do they no longer want to be a prosecutor? Do they think that they do more harm than good? I don't know. Like what big questions did the experience leave you with? But also I'm not saying you have to have every question answered, but I feel like I was left wanting. Like how are you, what impression did this experience leave on you? Especially obviously given the very big conversations that are being had around criminal justice now, it just seemed like they spent too much time talking about stuff I didn't find particularly compelling. And then later, they kind of left me a bit wanting. But with that being said, I did think that they did a good job of introducing people that they witnessed. It's clear that they observed what was going on. So I don't want to rag on their experience. I just think that they could flesh it out a bit more.
But thank you, Richard. Yeah, I agree with so many of your points. First off, this takes too long to get to the point. We don't need to hear about the commute to work. That's, as you said, Richard, I think that is like more like a full-length book or a long-form magazine article or something where we have 10,000 words to get where we can get to the point. Here we've got really 2 pages double-spaced. So the ultimate essay would really need to be close to half this length. And so if I were to cut anything, just first 2 paragraphs at least could just be completely cut, and we wouldn't be losing very much because we don't need to hear about all the details of getting to work. But this is a cool experience. I mean, working in a DA's office in LA, you must see a lot of stuff. That's pretty interesting. There is surely something that can be drawn out of that. And there are allusions to a couple of anecdotes. I watched a 16-year-old testify. I watched a man return to incarceration for working double time. Okay, so tell me about those experiences in particular, and what are your takeaways? But your takeaways can't simply be, well, how is it possible that liberty exists? That does seem maybe shallow, or does seem like, okay, well, are we just not going to have prosecutors? Maybe that's your opinion. If it is, okay, substantiate it. Or say what you would want to do differently to maybe add a little bit more of justice or balance into the mix. Again, there's some reference to my parents and people like my family. Okay, so then if there's, maybe you want to write a diversity statement, maybe you want to show how you have a unique perspective because you come from this background, yet you're working in this office. So you must see things in a different way than a lot of other folks in that office do. So tell us about that in particular. Say, okay, well, I grew up in this town. My friends were like this. I was like that. Yet I got this job here somehow. And so when I see someone like the 16-year-old, or I see someone like the man who was incarcerated for working double time, what does that mean to me? And how might I want to do things differently? How does that motivate or inspire me? But again, the personal impact, not so much in general about what the DA's office is like. In a way, the repeated phrase of the largest prosecutorial office, which does tend to get repetitive at times, maybe just say DA's office or keep it short. Is this a statement about a generic DA's office employee, or about you as that individual who comes from a background unlike most others in that office? To me, that is the point of a statement like this. Yeah, Victoria?
For me, it seemed quite strung along, mainly because it's too lengthy, and a lot of like the important anecdotes that she mentioned, like the 16-year-old and the man, were just like one sentence little things. And after you read that all, and I was thinking about it, I actually completely forgot about those two little anecdotes. So it gets lost, and it's almost like she's using, or he is using the largest prosecutorial office as like the stronghold of what's holding the essay together. It's kind of like, I did this, okay, and I don't have to do any work. I mentioned this, so I don't really have to do any extra writing and provide that I'm qualified because I worked at this place, so I don't have to do anything else. And I feel like like you mentioned before, you said that you could write about other people, but it's very difficult. And I would like her to tie it to her own personal experience instead of just a play of like and with short little examples of what she did in the day. There's a lot of parts that could have been that should have been excluded, but she added them anyways. So the main thing about it is it loses a lot of people's attention, and it makes them actually forget about one of the important parts that she mentioned.
Thank you, Victoria. Yeah, those details, those anecdotes of others do get lost. But again, I wouldn't even make those folks the focus. I think one could go deeper on them, but the real power here is, as always, in the personal. So I think this part here is where I would want to expand. To me, that is where the most power lies, the most potential lies in this particular statement. So I would draw that out, as I said. Yeah, Leslie?
I just want to say, so like I said in the chat, personally, I really liked it. I mean, obviously it wasn't perfect, but I felt they had a lot of potential and they had a lot of emotion, obviously bringing up those anecdotal cases. I just wanted to say, and maybe I interpreted it different, but for the beginning, when they were giving like kind of a background or what's it called, like the setup, it did definitely kind of go on for a little bit too long. But I think what they were trying to do, at least what I saw, is trying to contrast between like the suits and briefcases and like the world of law and like corporations and blah, blah, blah. And like they were trying to contrast it with, you know, people who are sleeping on the street and, you know, people who don't have homes and they're living in tents. So if they would have made that a bit more clear, I think that could have helped, and it would have definitely added an emotional element. But yeah, like I said, I think it's really interesting. I mean, I really like criminal law, so I thought it was well written, and I think their experience was really cool. But again, it was a little lengthy. But overall, I think this is one of the best ones that we've gone over. So that's just what I think.
Well, thank you for sharing, Leslie. Yeah, you make a good point. First off, I think this person does have a lot of writing ability, and it is interesting. I think it took a while to get to the point, given that we're looking at this as a personal statement, not as a day in the life. I think as a day in the life or as general expository writing, if I knew this person had, let's say, 1,500 words, I wouldn't mind these two paragraphs because they are setting the stage. I do get like the suits versus the tents. I think in this particular like sentence, walking on the sidewalk felt intrusive to their space. So I felt like I need to power walk. Okay, so that's bringing us into the head. That's kind of a unique way to think about it. Like 5 in the morning, 5:30 in the morning, walking to work. Not a lot of folks are in that situation. You know, 5:30, I can't say I've been walking around LA at 5:30 in the morning in that kind of neighborhood. So that is interesting to me. But does it serve the function of a personal statement? Or is it that general social commentary that others referenced as being somewhat shallow? Maybe. And again, that's one of those things where different people are going to say different things about the exact same piece of writing. There is a personal element as a reader that in a way is somewhat random. This might rub some people the wrong way. Other people might say, hey, cool. But knowing this is a personal statement in particular, I would tend to look more for getting to the point, bringing us inside your head, and not just, I don't want to hear general social commentary from a personal statement. I don't really care about the person's general opinion. I really want to know more about, okay, what is their deep takeaway from this kind of experience, whatever this is. So largest prosecutorial. No, I don't want to hear about your life as a general prosecutorial office employee or intern or paralegal or what have you. I want to know, okay, well, how has this deeply affected you, or how have you been impacted by it in some other way? And so to me, again, it was that when it took me until like the end of the first page to get to the idea that you have a unique perspective as an employee in that office. I'm like, okay, oh wow. So it's kind of like you're a secret agent. Like most people just see you as another suit, but in reality, there's something very different going on inside your head. I want to hear about that. That's my thought. But again, there's one of those things where we're kind of, in a way, we're kind of like a committee looking at this, right? We each have our own takes on it. So that's kind of cool. And that's one of the benefits of these kinds of workshops, is that the person who wrote this gets to hear from, I don't know, 5 or 6 people gave their opinions on this. That's cool. They can take it from any of those and apply, make some changes. Thank you for sharing that, Leslie. I appreciate the different perspectives. Any other thoughts on this one?
Kind of as an overview with all of them, kind of a trend I was seeing. They kind of seem to almost at the end get to the point where you have to guess what they really are trying to say they want in law school. Because we kind of go through this whole thing of being like, okay, she has this, or this person has their experience and they're, having this whole thing and all these different perspectives going on. And you can kind of piece together like, okay, yes, there's definitely a discrepancy here between what they see as right and what they're seeing as like, this is questionably wrong. And like, we don't know if this is like, they're having some reaction to this. So you can tell that they're like, there's some sense of like needing to find justice in this situation, but we don't really know how they see, like, we don't know their opinion. We're seeing their perspective, but they're not saying like, we think that, this should happen. We don't know like what they really wanted the outcome to be for these people who they're working for. So, and we were kind of seeing that with the other ones too, a little bit, where it was like, okay, like you're portraying this in a way where like, I'm feeling like this is wrong and this is something that's bothering you, but you're not outright saying that it's bothering you. And then we get to the point where it's like, okay, what do you want to do to fix the situation? So that's kind of,
that's interesting. Yeah. I think a lot of folks do tend to want to use that as a wrap up sort of idea, where it's like, I want to go to law school to change things.
Right.
So is that good or bad? I don't know. I think it makes sense. I get why you would put that at the end as a wrap up. That's not necessarily a problem to me.
No, I was just saying like, I don't know how to say that, but it's like, you can tell that they want to fix something. I'm just confused, like when they're saying that there's a problem, how they want to fix it. Like, I'm not seeing any way of them kind of saying like, I think this is wrong and we need to change this. I'm seeing them saying, I'm seeing all this questionable stuff and something needs to happen to it. And I want to go to law school. And they're kind of, at least with this one, seems to be that discrepancy where it's like, okay, what do you want to fix though?
Yeah, that's a good point. Okay, I get what you're saying. And that's where it comes down to, is it shallow? Is it well thought out? Do you have concrete goals that you've really thought through a bit? Like in this one here in particular, there is a need. Okay, well, there's a need. Okay, what are we going to do about this? I don't know. You go fix it, right? Like we need somebody to decide, okay, I'm going to stand up and take action on this. I want to go to law school to do X, Y, Z. So do I want to be the progressive prosecutor who changes things from within? Have I decided the whole system is corrupted? I want to work on the defense side. Am I just giving up altogether and I'm going to go do tax law, right? Like there are a number of different paths you can take. What do you want to do with it? And so I think taking a clear stand to say like, I'm motivated to do X, Y, Z. And that's one of my major reasons for wanting to go, or I want to definitely do this. Either's fine. You don't have to say exactly, I pledge to do X, Y, Z. I'm signing a blood oath. Like things can change, right? You don't need to have a concrete one specific goal for why you want to go to law school, but having a general idea and having that experience, if you do, certainly mentioning it certainly does help. So yeah, I think in a way, this one in particular does seem a bit vague in particular about not stating those goals. Yeah, so I'm glad you raised that one, Kendall. Thank you. All right, well, we've got one more for the evening. Here it is. With all the courage my 7-year-old body could muster, I made my way to my mother's room to lay down a load I carried for as long as I could remember. I entered her room and said, "Doug keeps telling me to pull down my underwear." I was saying so much while saying so little, yet with urgency in her voice, she simply yelled, "Doug, stop." My big brother was molesting me and had been for years. My mother was physically abusive to us, so to say I would get an ounce of gentleness from her would be a lie. However, I thought that something would happen. Only if I had chosen better words, maybe she would have understood I was crying out for help. It was then my obsession with using words began. I did not speak much after that day. I grew to be conscious of the words I selected, the time I said them, and to whom I allowed to listen. Abuse can have a tremendous effect on the psyche. For me, it created paralyzing anxiety, self-doubt, and fear for what I could not control. I did not stand up for that little girl then, but every day since I have been trying to make it up to her. I vowed then that without a doubt I would go to law school. I wanted to fight so badly for the unheard and children who were going through similar circumstances. The issue was I fought for everyone but myself. I've always been terrified of heights, never allowing myself to be a few feet off the ground. Yet there I was, 10 feet above water, knowing I had no other choice but to jump. Seconds later, I dived so deep in the water, I felt as if I would never come up. I breached the top to where I hear my boot camp instructors yell, "Keep swimming, you're okay." And that is just what I did. From lasting 10 minutes in the gas chamber, putting out fires, and rigorous physical training, I never thought I could make it through boot camp in the US Navy. I would tell myself I would never be able to do 50 push-ups and I would never be able to run a mile and a half in 10 minutes. To my surprise, I succeeded. Every step of the way, I had anxiety attacks that I had to fight, like a powerful current I was swimming against. The determination to get a portion of law school paid for was powerful motivation. When the time came to choose a job, legalman, paralegal for the Navy, was my first pick. However, I could not become one until I had served at least 2 years in the service. My only option was a cryptologic technician, a job I was not cut out for, yet earning a rate job in the Navy was not optional. There were no faces that looked like mine in class, the only one with no decoding background or technology degree. After months of breakdowns and self-doubt, graduation day came. It was time for the instructor to announce the 4 sailors out of the 25 of us who would move on to an advanced signals intelligence course while the rest went off to sea. Relieved I was finally done, I was ready to go out to sea, but then he called my name. I went to my instructor and told him I was not cut out for the advanced course. I asked him if he was sure he did not want to choose someone else. He said to me, "You are exactly what they are looking for. Your scores were high, not because it came easy to you, but because you applied yourself." So there I was, in an advanced course with classmates who had been in the Navy well over 10 years and who applied for this specific course to advance their careers, while I was there before going to my first duty station. To say I struggled in that course would be an understatement. I just could not understand why the universe would put me there. Little did I know just how much graduating from that course would do for me in the long run. Every day after, I was amazed at the fact that I led an office in decoding some of the most challenging signals, having a direct hand in advancing our country's intelligence posture. Although I excelled at my job, I had then reached 2 years in service. It was time to put in my transfer package to become a legalman, but it was denied. The cryptologic technician rate lacked the manpower the intelligence community needed. Not discouraged, I looked for anything within my command where I could be an advocate for the law, thus becoming legal assistant for 2 Command Judge Advocate Generals Corps, JAG. While working as legal assistants, while leading an advanced signal recovery team on a rotating shift basis proved to be difficult. Toward the end of my service contract, it was time to study for the LSAT. As I studied, that self-doubt crept in, begging the question if I truly had what it took, and if I should just stay in service as a cryptologist. That is when I understood why the universe put me through such a challenging career and put me in situations out of my element. If I could succeed in areas that I feared the most, why couldn't I succeed in my dream? The cloud of self-doubt and anxiety followed me. However, I have prevailed. All this time, I have looked at my generalized anxiety disorder as a mental health burden when it is really my superpower. It is the adrenaline from my anxiety that fuels my fight against fear. I owe it to that 7-year-old girl to no longer be prisoner to her trauma and to show her that she is worthy and that she belongs, no matter in the literal or figurative sense. My fear heights has been constant. But what I have learned is that on the other side of that fear, at the top of this seemingly unscalable heights, my future awaits me. I give appreciation to all my trials because now I know what I can accomplish if I just jump. Wow, this one's powerful. Okay. Thoughts on this one?
I think with this one, it seems like she's kind of unclear really why she wants to go into law school. And you can kind of sense it with the, I guess, kind of going around as to how crypto didn't tie in to the legal profession rather than personally how the class or how her experience or even, her making it through that course fits her for the challenges of rigorous academic study, I would say.
Yeah, there's that question, why law school? Definitely. I also have questions about how this all ties together. I feel like there could be multiple statements in this one. Victoria?
For me, it got a little bit confusing because she mentions herself, I believe, in like the third person. And it got a bit confusing for me because I was like, does she mean herself or some other little girl? And it seems like she views herself as like the underdog. And she got a little bit of, she rose up in spite of all that happened to her. But then she talks down about herself, saying that she wasn't able to do this, she didn't get this job. And I feel like she should take more value in herself for getting this far. I feel like she's pushing herself much down than actually the strong person that she is. Because a lot of people can't say the same thing from experience, all the things that she did and how far she has gotten despite that. So I think it's a very powerful essay, like you said, but I feel like it needs better structure, and she needs to know better, like, talking points, like better structure and style, because it changes from the beginning. It goes on one topic, and then it goes something, and she talks about the Navy. I feel like there should be somewhat of a connection between the two different paragraphs to help tie it in, or else it feels more disorganized.
Yeah, I think she opens and closes with her 7-year-old self and then jumps to the Navy in between. But again, how do those tie together? And I agree with you on the underdog thing, actually. And I sense that she's viewing herself as an underdog, as someone the odds are always against her, maybe even as a victim sometimes, in many contexts, obviously with good reason. But what's the story that she wants to tell? What's the theme she wants us to take away from this? I think are some questions that maybe she has some space to play with. Leslie?
Yeah, kind of going off what you said and what previous people have said. I liked it. Like, I think this person definitely has writing skill. But again, I feel like they definitely could have picked like one of these stories and expanded upon it instead of introducing so many smaller stories. And there was a lot of parts that, like, again, they were really like poignant and they were powerful, but they weren't like stretched out enough. Like, actually, one of my favorite parts was, I think it was in the middle. It's a little bit further down, but anyway, it was the part where it said like, oh, it didn't come easy to you, but you applied yourself. Like, I feel like that's a really, like, what's it called? Like, inspirational. And like, I mean, I think that's like a very good quote for law school in general. Like, I think like you're not going to get by just by being smart. Supposedly you need to apply yourself to it. So I think they could have centered the essay more around that and how they applied themselves and got over all of their trials with that. But other than that, it was also kind of lengthy because, again, they were introducing so many other things going on at the same time. And then also, you know, they had a bit of rough transitions from topic to topic, but the emotion is there, so that's good. It's definitely interesting, but it definitely needs a little more organizational help. So that's what I would say.
Well, thank you, Leslie. Ayaka and Fiona, I think both of you had comments if you wanted to share.
Okay, so I'm Fiona. I'm going to go. I think her story overall was the best that I've heard all evening. And I think, too, what I really love about her story, it focuses a lot on her determination, overcoming tons of triumph and also her endurance, because her wanting to join the Navy was because she wanted to shave off costs for law school. So at the end, her end goal was always first in mind. And so struggling through boot camp, she had to overcome that. Another setback she faced was not getting into the legalman field, which is the equivalent of being a paralegal in the Navy. So the general population might not know that, but I think if she clarified that legalman is synonymous to being a paralegal, it will give her that launch off pathway of, oh, wow, she wanted to get into this job, but then she had another curveball of going into crypto. And then when she got to crypto, she could have just lost focus and said, oh my God, I'm in this new field. I'm doing all this awesome stuff for the Navy and intelligence. I'm a part of this greater mission. But she still remained focused in saying, you know what, I want to get out and further my goal of still becoming an attorney, since I haven't been able to continue in those pursuits. So I think her military experience, some of the definitions need a little bit of clarification, but overall, it's a story of triumph and perseverance. And I think for the law school admissions department, that's what they're looking for. How do you, in the face of adversity, continue to pick yourself up and overcome them over and over again? Because that's what the legal profession is all about. So I think beautifully done.
Yeah, no, there's a lot that I love about this essay, and she could focus on the Navy portion specifically, and then the story about the 7-year-old girl that she was. Maybe that could be in a diversity statement where she could have a different angle on herself and her background to show her persistence there as well, and how she's been impacted by that as well. But the Navy example, I do think, obviously, just as they love student athletes, there's plenty of positive character traits associated with that. Same goes for the military, of course. And the fact that she chose the military to get law school paid for, of course, that's certainly worth mentioning. But I also wouldn't want her to do a play-by-play of her entire Navy experience, start to finish. This paragraph where she talks about this, then that, then that, then that, I'm not sure that we need that, because that's more like a resume to give just the list of the different things she did, where she could have done this, she did that instead. I don't want it to, this shouldn't be a work experience sort of thing. I want her to give specific anecdotes from the Navy time and going through telling us what that her instructor told her. Certainly that's worth mentioning. Talking about some of the details of difficult things she dealt with, like the gas chamber, fires, rigorous training. Sure, that's all great as well. So I think those are worth mentioning, but I wouldn't want this to simply become a list of different roles she's had in the Navy in particular. But Fiona, I do agree that there's plenty of perseverance in this essay, and that's definitely something they want to see. Ayaka, did you have thoughts you wanted to share on this one?
Yeah, so everyone said a lot of things, and I agree with most of it. I think one of the things, and I'm guilty of doing this in my own essay as well, is kind of getting passive, like having a passive voice where, and you mentioned it, Steve, where it sounds like a resume where it's like, oh, I was pushed into this and then I was pushed into that, and not talking about what I got out of that experience, or, you know, what positive thing is added on to my own experience of the world. And so if she can go into that, or this person can go into that, I think it would add on rather than sound a little bit more passive.
Thank you. No, Yaka, that's exactly right. Yeah, so to give the takeaways from those particular anecdotes, those particular cases she experienced in the Navy, rather than just giving us a list of A, B, C, 1, 2, 3 through the entire Navy journey. Thanks for that. Any other thoughts on this one, anybody?
I have a question.
Sure.
So for a diversity statement for this person, I'm assuming you could probably go the mental health route with it, but would the Navy perspective also be something that she could have put in there as well, and then be able to focus on a separate story in here? Is that a thing? I don't know if that's a thing.
You mean to write a diversity statement about military background?
Yeah, or mental.
Yeah, could be. Sure, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, diversity statement could be a lot of different things.
Okay.
It could be a lot of different things. It's just something unique about your background that you want to share, something that gives you a unique perspective. There's a lot of routes that you could take with that. So a lot of topics that people use for personal statements could be diversity statement as well. And one of the previous ones we did this evening about the undocumented applicant, that one could have been a diversity statement too, or part of that could have been as well. Yeah, there's a lot of routes one can take there. And that gives you some flexibility because you really get to give 2 essays rather than 1. So rather than trying to cram it all into one main personal statement.
Cool. Thank you.
Of course, thank you, Kendall. All right, folks, so we've been going for a while here. I want to thank you all for sticking it out. I know we went a bit long tonight, but again, thanks to everybody for joining. Thanks for all your feedback. Thanks for sharing your advice for all these folks who were vulnerable enough to share their personal statements with everybody. And if you're looking for more on this, again, I'm doing this inside my courses. We have law school application essay workshops multiple times per month, especially this time of year. We're covering not only the personal statement, but also the diversity statement, character and fitness, optional essays, letters of rec. So if you want your essays reviewed, we're doing that inside the courses. I also work with a small number of students one-on-one as well. And so feel free to reach out to me about that if you're looking for more. I'm putting a link to the courses here in the chat if you want to find out more. And of course, always feel free to email me if you have any questions. But again, thanks to all of you for sharing your feedback, for being so open with your advice for others. And stay tuned for more, everybody. And have a good night. And thanks for joining. Bye all. Thanks for tuning into the show. Please subscribe if you haven't done so already to be notified of new episodes as I release them. And feel free to reach out if you need anything at all as you move forward with your prep. I'm happy to help however I can. In the meantime, I'll wish you all the best and take care.